Good morning. My blue cable. Well, welcome. Thanks for taking the time to come out this morning. I hope it's going to be worth your while. Some familiar faces who already know me, so excuse the boring bit of just explaining a little bit about who I am. So I've come today very much with my counsellor hat on. I have attempted to complete the trifecta of caring roles, particularly within the Christian community. I've been a pastor, been a chaplain, and counsellor. So I put my master's in psychology to kind of good use, I hope, in helping people navigate some of the issues of their ordinary but very real lives and very real issues that they face. So I'm here to talk to the real life stuff that you and I deal with. I also do some supervision work for those who are in caring roles to try and help carers go the distance and last longer, because those of us who work with people find that very draining at times, and so it's good to get some help. I'm a family man. I am husband to Debbie. It'll be 20 years in February, so that's good. So apparently I have to take her somewhere if the border's open. If not, McDonald's. That's where you go if the borders aren't open. Yeah, exactly. I have adult children. I have 2 stepchildren from Debbie's first marriage, so I understand the dynamics of a blended family. Shannon's 25 and she's married. Jackson's 23, he'd like to be married. And I suspect that the lovely girl that he's with right now might be getting asked sometime soon. I didn't watch the video. And my daughter Emily is 18 and she just likes anything that moves. So she just likes boys. So she's a good girl, but she's currently not that discerning, it appears. Anyone who looks at her is fair game. So we're teaching her. And today we're going to take a look at conflict. And conflict is a part of life that many of us dislike. We would even describe ourselves as conflict averse. Some of us run from conflict at the thought of saying anything that might increase the likelihood of a difficult or tense conversation. Anybody else feeling that way this morning? Yes, good. I don't like it either. I don't think anybody likes it. Today, though, we can at least work on feeling equipped for it. We may never enjoy it, because it is always a little risky, isn't it? Because we know that these moments take 2 to tango, and so they don't necessarily go the way that we were hoping. In fact, I sat in with a friend just a couple of days ago. He asked me to come and try and navigate a conflict situation with some people, and within about 15 minutes I announced to the room, speaking out loud, that this conversation is not going at all how I imagined. And I think that's kind of how it feels for a lot of us once we start opening up difficult conversations, and we quickly find ourselves swimming in the moment and thinking, this is not how I imagined it was going to go, and now I'm not sure what to do. So before we start today, I'm going to ask you to just make sure that you connect with somebody near you, because at various points I'm going to ask you to kind of just share briefly with each other, talk to each other, preferably in kind of pairs, but threes will do as well. And so as you see who's around you and introduce yourself, I want you to ask the person next to you or behind you this question, which is simply, how will you know today had been a success? That's the question we ask at the beginning of the day, to get our mind thinking about what it is we're looking for. So why don't you ask the person next to you, how do you know today's going to be a success? How will you know? All right, we've got the slides back. Great. So, I joked to my wife yesterday when I was telling her about the seminar. I said, I feel like a plagiarist in the sense that I'm going to tell you some stuff today that come from a couple of very famous psychologists. And she said, well, darling, that's probably okay because they're probably not available. I said, well, one of them's dead. But, well, he's definitely not available. We'll start with the one who's still alive, who is one of my favourite relationship psychologist, an American Jewish psychologist by the name of John Gottman. And I would suggest to you that Gottman is the world's foremost expert on relationships, and sadly he would say that he is the world's expert on divorce and says that he can predict with 91% accuracy when a couple will end. And they will end because of what he has dubbed the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Because he says when these 4 are present, the end is nigh. Now, when we learn about the 4 today, let me preface it by saying that they make appearances in most relationships at some point or another. So it's not that they've ever appeared is not the problem. It's when they become the dominant pattern of communication. Then whatever relationship is experiencing those 4 attributes is getting itself into very big trouble. Some of you have heard it before, and I have to confess also as I start today that, you know, when you retell something enough times, a bit like Chinese whispers, can you still say Chinese whispers? Is that now casual racism? Probably is. Whatever whispers it is, you end up subtly changing things, right? And I realised I had subtly changed the way I had been talking about Gottman's 4 horsemen when I was telling people, not in ways that necessarily made it wrong, but I'm glad today that even I have learned something as I've gone back and reviewed and listened to Gottman speaking carefully again about these 4 horsemen. I've gotten it even clearer again in my head. So, we're going to take a look at some principles. Come on in. Feel free if you want to come on in. You're welcome to. We want to take a look at really what Gottman says kind of goes wrong from the very beginning, or often can go wrong for relationships, particularly when it comes to conflict. So where does he start? He starts with this idea, what he calls the harsh starter. Says Gottman observes in the beginning phases of a conversation that either spouse or person immediately go into it with negative or accusatory words. The anger of the moment starts to already be very present. Conversations that start harshly frequently end the same way without anything really being resolved. An outcome can usually be determined on the first 3 minutes of a 15-minute conversation. How we start is really important when it comes to opening up difficult conversations. So we're going to start talking about all of this today, but we're going to start by really looking at what goes wrong first of all. So there's something to start thinking about, is realizing that conversations, difficult ones, need to have a much smoother run-up. And let me ask you the question, how might you avoid the harsh startup? What might strike you as the obvious things that you might do to minimize the chances of a harsh startup? All right. So after the harsh startup come our 4 horsemen. There they are in kind of brief summary, but don't worry, we're going to stop and we're going to go slowly through each of the 4 horsemen. We're going to hear from John Gottman himself, and they've even got some video footage of some couples who I presume are acting, but maybe they're not acting, it looks very real to me. So let's take a look at the first 2. So 2 of the horsemen we might call offensive, in that they are the things that provoke in a conflict situation, and then 2 of them are defensive in that they are the response often to being provoked. So let's have a look at our first video.
You say that there are 4 negative patterns that can predict divorce. And I think this is really critical for folks to watch. We're going to show some videotapes of couples that Dr. Gottman and his associates have interviewed. And we're going to look at specific things they do in fights, which frankly I think a lot of people do. I think a lot of people in the audience are going to notice things that maybe they do. A lot of you at home are going to notice things. The first one is criticism. Take a look at this example.
Because that's your way of dealing with everything. You don't do it. You don't want to do it, you don't do it. It's like doing your chores. What are you doing to make the chore thing change? You know, like you want that to run differently where they do more chores. What kind of planning have you and time have you spent fixing it? Or you just keep telling me you want it to run differently?
All right, so criticism. Anyone in the audience use criticism in an argument? Oh, here, over here. Only one person being honest over here. Everyone else is lying.
I'm going to tell the whole world that I'm critical.
All right.
No.
So, but you find in noticing, looking at that, you notice something you do as well.
It looked like me.
It looked like you.
And I wanted to be, yeah. And I wanted some tips to, fight fear and be nice. And I think you helped when you said it's the same. What did you say with your wife? It was the same complaint, but you
right.
just
I just said it in a way she could hear it.
Exactly.
Right.
And why is criticism so dangerous to a relationship?
Well, it's really a way of fueling the attack. So you state your complaint as an attack on the other person. And what you're going to get back is, you're not so perfect either, or an innocent victim kind of response. And so it's just not constructive. It winds up just, leading to an escalation of the conflict. Because you're really saying, as far as I can tell, I'm really pretty close to perfect, but you are defective. And the answer you're going to get is, you're not so perfect.
Sounds familiar?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Well, I hope that helped. You say another divorce predictor is contempt. I find this one really fascinating. Let's take a look at this tape.
Yeah, but a lot of the time, I already know what you're going to say. Oh, it'll be alright. Oh, we'll get through it. Oh, Megan, it'll be okay. Oh, I love you. I'm behind you.
All right. So that guy wouldn't even get up, by the way. He was so contemptuous, he was just laying back. So why is that so toxic?
Well, he's mocking her, right? So he's acting superior to her. And not only is contempt our best predictor of divorce in gay and lesbian relationships, as well as heterosexual ones, because it's really this air of superiority. It's sulfuric acid for love. If you don't have respect in a relationship...
Sulfuric acid for love.
It really is. I mean, you need respect in a relationship. And contempt is disrespect. And it's also a predictor of how many infectious illnesses his wife is going to have in the next 4 years. It erodes the immune system.
Really?
It erodes the immune system.
Contempt erodes the immune system?
Absolutely.
Wait, you say you use contempt?
Yes, I do. I agree with him fully, because my husband's a geneticist. He's Australian. They don't like arguments. That's why they have a shed. They got the back so they can hide when there's an argument. So that triggers contempt, and I continue having contempt. And over the years, I've become ill. I've had an immune system problem. Yeah.
It's amazing to me that something like contempt can have physical repercussions.
Yeah, and at Ohio State University, Jan Kiko Glazer and Ron Glazer have documented how T lymphocytes don't proliferate as much. Natural killer cells, which are cytotoxic against tumors, are not as effective in a relationship that has contempt and criticism in it.
Wow, so there you go. So you might actually save somebody's life if you could keep the contempt under wraps. So let's go back and drill down a little bit further to make sure that we really understood. Criticism is when we move beyond simply a complaint about behavior to actually really casting some kind of aspersion on the person. When we're really saying there's something wrong with you. So words like always and never are going to be in there. And there's an example on the screen there. Why are you so forgetful? You just don't care. This is much deeper than the issue. Now we're ascribing a bad motive. Or to use the analogy that's been suggested, we are suggesting the other person might be the devil. And we are definitely suggesting there's something wrong with them. The problem here isn't your behavior, it's you. It's much deeper than that. And of course, when it comes to navigating conflict, once it's gotten personal like that, we've gotten away from the issue because the person is no longer thinking about the issue. They're now thinking about this character assassination. So when you've been on the receiving end of criticism, what are some of the thoughts, the fears, the questions that are coming up in you when somebody speaks to you like that? Has anybody been on the receiving end of criticism? So what's it like? What does it feel like when you are criticized? So criticism is dangerous for both people in the relationship. Because if you genuinely believe the other person doesn't care, then what could they possibly do to get you to change your mind? And if they genuinely feel like that's how they've been analysed, they feel like what would be the point in trying? Can we see now how powerful criticism is in derailing the conversation. The implication is that the offending partner hasn't simply offended, but is in fact offensive, that it's too personal. So when we're thinking about our relationships, we've got to say, when does it get personal? When do the attacks begin that say this is more than just the issue that we're talking about? That we're actually suggesting there's something inherently wrong with the person. And then comes this contempt. And did you hear how contempt was labelled the kind of the king of the horsemen? It's the most destructive of the four. And it's the most subtle. What might somebody do when they're displaying contempt that is subtle? Contempt is that cynicism, that sarcasm, that superiority that says that somehow I'm better than you because I don't do the thing you're doing. And it is this looking down. Right. So we can hear when we're talking about harsh startups, how that parental tone can easily morph into contempt. It's only one step away, and suddenly I'm very much in judgment of you, looking down on you. The thing is, hear this, friends, it's so hard to love your judge. So hard. For those of us who share a Christian faith, it's been so important to hear the way in which the Bible will say things like that Jesus did not come to judge the world, to condemn the world, but to save it. And God was at great pains to say, I'm not here to do that thing, knowing that it's hard to love your judge. And it's hard to be married to a judge. It's hard to be married to someone who is your policeman, constantly pointing out where you fall short, constantly nitpicking at your every failing. It's hard to love that person. These things erode love. And contempt is a devastating blow to a relationship. And so, the challenge for you and I is to, firstly, if we are the vessel through which contempt is visiting the relationship, is to realize, oh boy, I just invited one of the four horsemen into the relationship, and this has made it very difficult for me to love this person. Because after all, if I think that you're lazy, or that you don't care, or that you're useless, it's hard for me to love you. It's really hard for you to love me. Really hard for you to want to entrust yourself to me. See, loving relationships are built on trust, and this erodes trust. This makes it almost impossible to trust the other person. How can I trust myself to you if when I am vulnerable to you, you use it against me? And contempt, you see, is when we start to weaponize vulnerability. Which is why for many of us, we think that being vulnerable is something we'd like to avoid. It's because, sadly, we have encountered somebody else weaponizing it. That rather entrusting the very human part of me and saying, I am not perfect, and I have not yet arrived, but I need love and I need care, instead that very weakness is now turned on me and weaponized. That's what contempt will do. So there's the two offensive horsemen. So those two typically get the show rolling, and you can well imagine that criticism and contempt often appear together, but they mostly appear together. But they can be responsive. I mean, you can be contemptuous in response to criticism, for sure you can. But often we deliver our critique with some contempt thrown in for free. Let's see what happens on the other side of contempt. These are the two sort of most defensive postures, but are also the four horsemen. All right. Anybody sensing that they've seen some of these things in real life? Yeah. So let's take a look at defensiveness a bit more closely. Self-protection in the form of some righteous indignation or innocent victimhood. You're always picking on me. Leave me alone. But defensiveness, of course, is just a way of blame. This is where the contempt and criticism help fuel and activate that, because the person who's just been speaking may in fact be doing something unhelpful. So in a sense, the defensiveness kind of makes sense, doesn't it? It's like, well, I've just been observing your very judgmental attitude towards me. So now I'm going to let you know that you're not so perfect either, honey. And now we're returning fire. So defensiveness is really just return criticism, isn't it? The problem isn't me, the problem is you. Oh, good. So now we're both the problem, but we're still not talking about the real problem. We've just returned fire, and now everybody is feeling under attack. Everybody is feeling rather vulnerable in this moment. And so defensiveness, of course, escalates and gets us off topic so quickly, doesn't it? Because now we've moved on to these much larger, broader topics of just how bad you are and just how bad I am, and whether it's true that you're worse than me or I'm worse than you. Love is leaving the room when we do this. Love does not stick around for this fight. And this is the danger of defensiveness as a tactic, because I'm so concerned about my own safety. So if you were here for the last seminar, we were talking a lot about what happens when your fight or flight or freeze body gets activated. And this is one of the problems, is that if we start off with a harsh startup, chances are we're in the wrong body, we're already in fight or flight, and the other person will hear our frightened brain and get frightened too, and then they start responding in the wrong body, and we can't actually solve any problems. And then, of course, this final one of stonewalling, where the listener withdraws from the interaction, shuts down, closes down. They're experiencing this thing called flooding, which we're going to take a look at, where they're feeling like they are drowning in the feeling. And really, this is just of the fight, flight, freeze. What is stonewalling? Freeze. So this is a kind of freeze. The body is overwhelmed by the attack. It says, this is too much for me to cope with. I can't get out of here, and I don't want to make it worse, so I'll just shut down. It actually could be a type of flight, couldn't it? It could be a retreat within you. Hands up who understands that idea, that I can retreat within myself so you can't hurt me anymore. Yes, isn't it interesting to think that you can flee without leaving the room? So stonewalling again means we're in the wrong body. If you didn't hear Gottman saying it, when they've hooked particularly men up who are more prone to stonewalling, their heart is pounding at the rate of an athlete, and yet they are still on the outside. This is a surprise often when I'm talking with couples about this, and the husband will often say, yes, I'm absolutely exploding on the inside. But you're so seemingly detached or calm. Well, it's all a shock. And it's all intended to try and de-escalate, but it has the opposite effect. Because if you're receiving stonewalling, how do you feel as the person? You're talking with the other person, just clammed up, shut down, not interacting. What's that like for you?
I'm not getting through.
Right, and so what do you want to do when you don't feel like you're getting through?
Get harder.
Right, what if I dial it up? Right, as my little phrase is, that's when the tears and the swears appear. You know, if I dial up the emotion, dial up the intensity, maybe you'll listen to me now. Of course, what's happening to the stonewaller when it gets dialed up? They are shutting down further. I was right to shut down. This person is cray-cray. I am going to not say nothing. This person is flipping their lid. They are not safe. I'm not speaking. Meantime, they're dialing it up another notch. And so things like ranting start to come into play. Any recovering ranters in the room? I'm certainly one. Oh, just me. I'm really good. I love a good rant. So we understand that these self-protective ways of trying to cope with conflict don't heal the original issue, but create new issues. This feeling like we can't talk about stuff. And of course, what you get as the result of the four horsemen often is this kind of not talking, not engaging anymore. After all, what's the point? It'll only go bad. But you see, you live like that long enough, and eventually, if you're in a couple, one of you wakes up and thinks, why are we doing this anymore? What's the point? We are separate. You know, our oneness has now become two-ness again. And we're back being two, moving in the opposite direction. So yes, let's talk about flooding, just so that we specifically identify this, because it's not necessarily true that the stonewaller is flooding, but well, they certainly are. But it might also be that the other person is now starting to swim as well. That as they're starting to drown in the feelings, they're clutching at straws, they are now trying to get themselves back to some kind of equilibrium. So the negativity, the contempt, the criticism, or the defensiveness is that you're feeling shell-shocked and feeling very defensive to avoid further attacks or replays of negative conversations. The partner will do whatever they can to protect themselves and to disengage. And so with that, of course, we need to notice again this body problem. Interesting that when Gottman has interviewed people who have divorced, where marriages and relationships have ended, notice a couple of physiological things. That one reason is that people separate and divorce, they signal at least one partner feels emotional distress when dealing with the other. I see this in the counselling room all the time, and I suggest, so why not talk to him about it? And you just watch the distress appear. Talk about it. You're kidding me. I'd rather die. Right? Their body is in distress at the thought of it. You can't be with someone who is causing this distress. Your body is functioning as if they are an enemy, a threat to you that needs to be avoided. Secondly, the physical sensations that accompany being flooded, increased heart rate and sweating, greatly prohibit being able to have a problem-solving conversation. So this is that practical reality that we never do get round to sorting stuff out. So what you get is explosions, separation, and then often let's never revisit this. Stuff under the carpet. Topics that never did get resolved. And as they mount up and mount up and mount up, suddenly you feel like, I don't want to do this anymore. So these become the physiological problems of distress. You can't be in fight or flight and love each other. Then Gottman says it's a fifth sign. Sorry that I'm going to go through 6 of them today. The fifth sign is a failed repair attempt. That's the real challenge. That often, because of this physiological problem, we don't come back to make good. We don't actually address the issue or repair the hurtful words that are said. But in healthy conflict, we try and make amends. We may even try and ease the tension. Of course, this is what my son loves to do, is to make the joke, to try and ease the tension. Oh, you're having a go at me and my McDonald's. Oh, I'll make a joke. But when we're actually caring for each other, in healthy conflict, when we notice that one of us is in the wrong body, we call a time out. I can see that you're feeling really uptight at the moment. I can see that this is an uncomfortable conversation. Why don't we take a break? Why don't you go use the little boys or girls room and let's get a cup of tea. Let's do this again after dinner. Let's see if we can revisit this when we've had a chance to gather our thoughts. You see, what Gottman points out is that the disasters of relationships, which are the 4 horsemen, are all about self-protection. But the masters of relationships, those who are having healthy, growing relationships, even in the midst of conflict, are attending to the other person's needs, are caring for them. And I can see this in a counselling environment all the time. I will always watch when a couple starts to have a disagreement in front of me to see if they make any repair movements towards each other. And the couples I know who are closer to getting things sorted will do things like this. Even when maybe the wife is saying something that she knows would be very hurtful to hear, reaches out and touches his knee while she says it. She's attending to him. She is saying to him, I know this is probably hurting for you to hear, but I will care for you while I'm saying it. I'm still going to say it, but I'm going to care for you while I say it. The masters of the relationships repair even as they go. They're attentive to how this experience is going for the other person, rather than the win-at-all-costs approach of the 4 horsemen. And then finally, the sign that communication has really gone badly is as a kind of a overarching problem, is that when asked to recall things like your wedding, for example, instead of focusing on the good things, they suddenly can only now remember the bad things. And this is this kind of retroactive threat thing. Now my brain has collected up evidence of all the wrong things and is holding on to them. As one husband said, my wife gets historical when she's angry. I said, don't you mean hysterical? She says, no, historical. She tells me everything I've ever done. And sometimes we get historical because of the ongoing sense of threat. We feel like it would be safe to keep a record. It would be safe to hold on to things. I wouldn't want to forget, lest I be stupid enough to trust this person. Whereas love keeps no record of wrongs. Love trusts. So, some answers quickly for the 4 horsemen, then we're going to take a morning tea break. So the antidote to criticism is about complaint. Complaint focuses merely on the action rather than the person. Complaint says, as Jan pointed out, these I statements, how I am feeling, what's happening for me. I feel exhausted. I feel like I've been missing you lately. I'm not feeling very heard. Rather than you statements. Criticism's about you. And so criticism is about the gentle starter. Starting with me. The problem here is that I'm having certain feelings, not the problem with you. The antidote to contempt is about building a culture of appreciation. Reminding ourselves that yes, there is this problem that we need to talk about. There has been this behaviour that I'd like to see some change in. But the person who I'm talking to is fundamentally good, is fundamentally on my team, is fundamentally someone who I love and trust. And so I remind myself as part of the gentle starter, this is a good person with good motives who wishes to do the right thing. This changes my attitude. Because I realise I want to win the person, not just the argument. Because the person is worth winning. Because I've reminded myself of who this really is. Someone who loves, someone who cares. So here's a little test. True or false to ask yourself. I can easily list 3 things I admire about my partner. I'm really proud of my partner. I can easily tell you why I married my partner. If I had to do it all over again, I would marry the same person. Just recently I was talking with someone whose relationship had broken up, and this person says, but I really love him, I still love him. I'm like, oh, is that right? Tell me why you love him. Couldn't. There was not actually really anything there at all, other than a sense of historical connection. So we need to practice love in our mind and in our actions. Practice building up this picture that this is a person who is worth repairing things with, because on the other side of repair is a good relationship, is real connection, is a chance to have a happy life together. But if I cultivate the judgmental, negative attitudes, then I'm disarming all of that, disabling all of that, because I'm really not anticipating things to go that well on the other side anyway. So what's the point? Antidote to defensiveness is to try and accept some responsibility as best you can for what you've heard. Even if it's only because you heard that the person's having a bad time. This is this empathy without sort of agreement, that if, for example, as we had that former example, the person said, I feel lonely, disconnected from them. And even if you sense there's a kind of a blame happening in this moment, you could say, well, it is terrible to feel lonely. I'm really sad to hear that you're feeling lonely. You're not necessarily saying that you're the author of that feeling or that you're taking responsibility for that feeling, but you're acknowledging, hey, this person has a feeling that it would not be fun to have. So I'm sad that you're feeling that way. That makes me sad to know that you're feeling that way. But then to try and take some responsibility for the complaint. That if it's valid in any way, yes, you're right. I did say I would take out the rubbish and I didn't, and I'm sorry. To actually acknowledge some truth. And the antidote to stonewalling, well, first of all, is to stop. realizing I'm in the wrong body, we need to take a break, I need to get back into the right body because I'm currently flooded with feelings that's making it impossible for me to actually hear you. And this is one of those times where, particularly in a couple relationship, to have some kind of code word or phrase that you can agree long in advance, that if I'm feeling this way, I'm going to say that the thing that we say that says, yes, we've agreed in advance that when you say that, we take a break. And as Gottman points out, if that phrase is in any way kind of cute or funny, then it might actually give a little bit of relief if we have a chuckle as we do it, but certainly that there be some agreement about fighting fear. These are the rules of the game. And finally, as far as stonewalling goes, is you, the one who is stonewalling, really making sure that you take the time to self-soothe, to get back into the right body, to say, I'm ready to engage. I don't want to feel afraid anymore. And I want us to be able to talk about this, so I'm going to take a walk around the block. I'm going to go and splash some water on my face. I'm going to do whatever it is I need to do to calm my body back down. So, lots in there. I'm going to hand out some handouts. That's what they're called. There we go. So this is just a summary of what we've just been talking about. If you've been wanting to take something away today, send those around, and the extras can come back. So, just as we break for our first morning tea and some lovely hot scones, questions, thoughts, comments? What are you thinking about what you've heard so far in terms of these 4 horsemen and some potential antidotes to be honest with you? I think the third session today is the most important one. Like if I only had time for one session, we'd do the third session. So that's still to come. And perhaps because I'm a counsellor, I find this session the hardest to, in a sense, convey with passion, because these are skills I've been thinking about and practicing for thousands of hours. And so for me, I have trouble remembering that some of this stuff isn't as natural and obvious to everybody because they haven't had a chance to practice the way some of us have been forced to practice because of what we do. So, listening. You'd think it would come naturally. I think that's one of the challenges in life, isn't it? We think a lot of stuff should come naturally to us. We don't think I should have to learn how to do that. I've got ears, they pick up sound. Surely listening is something I'm good at. But not necessarily. So just by way of a bit of comic relief as we start this session, the art of active listening. Nice. All right, that was good fun because listening isn't always easy. What did we learn though from the video? What were the challenges and what were the skills that the teacher was hoping that Ray was going to practice in that moment? Let's see if we can name a few of them before we get started. Good stuff. Right, so we're going to take a look at some of the active listening skills to try and give some more name and language to them, and then we're going to practice. So we will probably spend the end of this little session doing a little bit of work together, and then we'll have another quick break, and then what I hope will be the most important, but then again, you might think this is the most important. Okay, so when it comes to active listening, some practical skills for us to note today. Things like making eye contact when the other person speaks. What's a scenario at home that often makes that difficult for men and women? TV. What's the thing that the phone now? Yes, of course, on the phone. Yeah. My daughter must have got this phrase from one of her teachers, but for most of her childhood I've had an office at home, and so I was on the computer one night, and she walked into my office and said this, Dad, give me your eyes and your ears. Because she knew I was more than capable of having the conversation, potentially, whilst looking at the screen. Why is eye contact important, apart from knowing that you've got attention? What's the benefit? More engaging. I'm much more present perhaps in the moment. Yeah, what else? Body language, yeah.
I was going to say, because a lot of our communication is not verbal.
Yes.
So you can pick up on other cues.
Right. Yeah.
Undivided attention.
The undivided attention is very helpful for the other person to know. But these non-verbal cues, I mean, how often have you asked someone how they are and they've said, I'm fine. The word said fine, but the I said not fine. Yeah, so we get critical information.
The eyes actually show that there's an expectation that there's going to be something said.
Right.
So,
Yeah, the expectation of interaction, of receiving what's being said, for sure. So what seems practical, although interestingly, it's been noted, I think, with some value that oftentimes for men, this rule is not quite as applicable if the man is saying something more vulnerable. Men often prefer, you'll notice men will often sit side by side to have conversations, looking at something, a third thing, like the game, are more likely to be vulnerable. Actually, they find eye contact can be a bit intimidating.
yeah, I was just going to say the same thing, and also other cultures. I'm mentioning at the moment the Asian, and when it gets really hairy, eye contact is the last thing he wants. He's a man and also a different person.
Right, so let's be clear that culture might play a part here. My dad manages a cricket club that is predominantly Indian members, and he's always very confused that the people he speaks to rarely look him in the eye. And I said, I wonder if that's actually the respect of an elder, that there might in fact be a cultural value at play there. So it's worth working out. Is this some other rule, or is this critical information? So we want to make sure that our body language is open, that we're not sitting saying, yeah, tell me what your problem is, all closed up, everything's closed, tell me something. But rather that we are sitting and conveying that we are relaxed, we are open, we're ready to receive what it is that you have to say. And sending those signals, the nodding, the umming, what's called the minimal encourages, oh. Yes, the minimal encourages are very helpful. Paraphrasing. This is one of those things that feels very awkward when you first do it if it's not your practice to do it. And this is one of those skills that I actually use in counselling very much intentionally because it's not my natural bent. But I do it for two reasons. One is that I want to, again, convey understanding, but two, I'm also buying myself some time. Right? And that can be very helpful to know why you can use paraphrasing. So you could say something like, oh, so you've been telling me that it's been very difficult at home, and when they do this, you feel this way, and that's very difficult for you, because what you like is for this to happen. And as you're paraphrasing the story, you're thinking, oh, what am I saying next? You give yourself some time. So paraphrasing is very helpful. We want to offer simply a reflection of what is said, but withholding what we think or feel about what has been said. Because that's what often gets us tripped up, is we start to speak about our impressions of it. Well, you probably shouldn't have said it that way. Or did you ever think that maybe they're doing this? And suddenly you're offering commentary instead of paraphrase. Remember, active listening is about this end game of the other person feeling heard and understood and not judged for it. Even if in the story they're confessing to doing or saying the wrong thing. And here's a little thing I often try to keep in mind, particularly in adult interactions, to keep this kind of parental tone at bay, is to just check in with yourself and say, does the other person really think that what they just said or did is okay? Because if they already know it isn't okay, they don't need you to point it out. They already know it isn't okay. So there's no need to point this out. You're actually just rubbing their face in it at that point. So remind yourself, yep, they probably already know that yelling isn't helpful. They've probably already worked out that swears aren't welcome in our home. That punching the wall isn't appreciated. They probably don't need me to point out what they already know to be true. Right? So try and withhold our judgments, withhold our opinions, but rather simply reflect back a summary of what we've heard. Interruption. It is very difficult, particularly I find that interrupting is difficult when I've heard something I know is untrue. Find that? You'd really like to kind of just pause them and say, well, that's wrong, that's not true. You got the wrong end of that. so important to try and resist this temptation of interrupt, to let the person finish what they are saying, particularly because by the end of them sharing their story, they may in fact reveal that they know the thing you're about to say. Because by the end of the story might end like this. And then I had a chance to think about it and I realised he didn't mean that at all. Right? And you've already jumped in with, but he didn't mean that at all. It's like, let them finish. Maybe the story doesn't end the way you think it does. And therefore, try and not be working on your reply. The active listening, the reason that it's active is that you're telling yourself, my job is to be a good listener here. Now, one of the things that I encourage in relationships is to inquire at the beginning of a conversation, what kind of listener do you need me to be? Because what do men often traditionally think that the listening is required for? To fix it, to offer advice and what to do. Right? But there are different types of listening. Let's name some of the different types of listening. Why do we want to tell stories to each other? Why do we want to speak to each other? I mean, yes, sometimes we want advice, but why else?
To give information to the other person.
Say again?
To give information.
So just simply give information. I went here, I did that. Yep, sorry. Confirmation? Okay, all right. Yeah, why else do we speak?
Relationship building.
Right, we simply wish to make connections. Yeah. It's okay. To give up very personal information that we wish the other person to know. Yeah. You just want to kind of decompress and let out the story, and it helps that somebody else heard it. Yeah, sure. What else? More, want clarity about something. Want to share a problem. Yeah. Making sense of things. Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes being heard helps you make sense, right? I don't need you to say anything. It's just as I've heard it differently. I've understood it. So sharing reality is one of the big reasons that we listen to each other, that we want to be heard. Because, remember from our last time we talked about trauma, remember the two aspects of trauma that are difficult is one, that a bad thing happened to me, and second, particularly childhood trauma, that I was alone when it happened, or I was alone to deal with the pain. And when we share the story with another person, in all of its technicolor details, sometimes what happens is we don't feel like we're alone in that story anymore. That the fact that you understand exactly what happened means it's almost as if you were there. And that's already beginning to heal and strengthen me in the listening. Which is perhaps why sometimes my wife appears to be able to replay a 20-minute conversation with a friend to me in 40 minutes. It's considered to be some kind of special skill. Right. Watching for non-verbal behaviour to pick up on hidden meaning. What might be some of the non-verbal cues that you need to notice? Biting their lip. Yeah. Tears. Notice that some kind of moisture's coming to the eyes. Yeah. The tensioning of the mouth, yeah. So you're looking for tension, yeah.
Fidgeting and stuff.
Interesting, fidgeting, yes, can often be an indication the person is trying to duck or avoid something, yeah. So picking up those cues, yeah. The eyes, yeah, sometimes people's eyes start to do funny things while they're sharing something deeply emotional or important.
The whole way of body language, the closed.
Right, yes, you watch their body language move from open to closed, and you realise, there's something they're trying to keep now. And sometimes we just have to acknowledge it in ourselves. You're like, oh, wow, they're feeling defensive right now. Because there's always a challenge in these moments between acknowledging it and drawing the person into the light, or acknowledging it and realising they're not yet ready. They're not yet ready. Because isn't it a terrible feeling in life when you don't want to talk about something deep or personal and the other person kind of makes you? And you're feeling like, no, I don't want to talk about this. This is too scary. I'm not ready for this. Right? So what we want to do is at least acknowledge to ourselves. So when we were talking right at the beginning about what's it like to be criticized, and what's your name? And Susanna responded, and she gave away a non-verbal cue that you wouldn't have seen, and that was that her cheeks flushed red and her eyes filled with water. Now, what should be my response as the speaker to realizing that now that she's talking to me, she's having some physical reaction to the story? What's the right response? Right. Need to be very empathetic to that and attentive to the fact that, oh, Susanna's having some feelings. These are probably not comfortable feelings given the topic. I don't want her to feel any more exposed, so I need to make sure I'm soft. I might need to change my approach here in response to that. So facial expressions, tone of voice, listening with our whole body. Active listening is with our whole body. Are we sensing the unspoken cues, the information that the person is trying to convey to me? Shutting down your internal dialogue is the hard work, isn't it? To say, no, I don't need to keep thinking about this, or, what I'm going to have for lunch, or whatever it is that's going on inside my head. Try and bring myself to be present. The active listening is about coaching yourself in that moment. I want to be properly here for this person. I want to do a good job of this. Now, men, listen to me. If you do a good job of active listening, you may only have to hear the story once. It will be longer, but it'll only be once. Because stories that get repeated are mostly repeated because we're still waiting to be heard. So if you practice this, you do yourself a favor that you'll listen long, but you'll listen once. And if you hear a repeat, so what would you say then? If you're hearing a repeat of a story, and not just talk to the guys, but in general, when someone is telling us a story now for the second, third, 10th millionth time, what could we ask them? Well, do we acknowledge they might not be feeling it, but what would we ask them? Well, think about it, guys. Oh, otherwise.
What feelings does that evoke for you?
Right. Can you tell me some more about what's happening for you right now? Yeah. Because I noticed that you're telling me this, but what else might we ask? Right, this seems really important to you that you're told it to me again. Why is that? And what clarifying question might we press into at this point? What do you need? Yeah, or to say it the way I would say it, what is the thing you really need me to understand right now? Yeah. There's something that you perhaps perceive I've not gotten. What is that? Yeah, what do you need me to do? Is there something that I've missed? Would it be okay if we turn the heaters off? Okay, so trying to stay present with people, we're nearly there and then we're going to have a practice. Asking questions. Again, it's an active process. I don't know about you, but sadly, work life has taught me the opposite skill. Work life has taught me that if I don't ask questions, this meeting will be over sooner. We can all get back to work. So unfortunately, work life often does not enhance these skills. But in personal interactions, we want to ask probing questions. And they might be as simple as, oh, tell me more about that. Or when they use a particular phrase that you realize there's more behind. And it was a disaster. What do you mean by disaster? Get them to unpack a word, a phrase. What does that mean? Disaster. In what way? So I'll ask questions. So when I went and did my little hanging out with my friend, this couple that we were meeting with wanted to tell the story of a hurt. And as they were telling the story of the hurtful thing, so I did my paraphrase. I said, oh, so what I'm hearing is that this happened, that happened, and that happened, and you felt this way. And then I said, and what was the worst part of that for you? Was it this part of it or that part of it? And then she said, no, it was this other thing. And then was able to bring more valuable information in. not assuming that I've heard everything, by probing for more. And what does probing do for the other member? Right, so that sense that you actually have a yearning to know. Yeah, what else? Right, they might learn something themselves, yeah.
It's showing that you're hearing about what it is that's perhaps beautiful.
Right, and it's a real expression of care to ask the question, isn't it? Yeah. They might find the answers that they're looking for, yeah, sure.
Can I throw out a warning sign here? Just something that I've experienced just recently. When those probing questions have been asked into very private information, class stuff, delicate stuff, and I'm quite private with the really private things. So they were probing, as in you must come in order to get closer. And then I revealed stuff that was delicate and that, brought water to my eyes. And then only a few moments later, in the same situation, in the same conversation, it was thrown at me that I was not boring the socks off, but I listened to you all morning about your stuff, and that this really delicate information was then treated like trash and thrown back at me as a time waster. When we do active listening and do the probing into delicate stuff, to be really careful not to sort of diminish the value of the information we receive.
We want to care for the person, for sure, and using the stuff against them is not helping.
I'm in a situation where I was probably in my fix-it mode, and I was trying to help someone that was telling me about a situation, so I asked some probing questions, and they got very angry with me.
Right. So where probing becomes interrogation, that's a real problem. Probing is wanting to draw and evoke and to say, I'm willing to hear more, to know more if you want. But interrogation, what's the difference? What's the tone in interrogation? Yeah, I'm trying to kind of work out if you're telling the truth or not. What's the whole story here, buddy? Yeah, you're right.
Inquisitorial.
Huh?
It's inquisitorial.
Well, inquisitorial is okay. I want to have a kind of a, I don't want it to be an inquisition, but I want to be curious. And I think that's the distinction. I want to be curious. I want to be genuinely interested to know. But here's a real goal, I find, when it's really deep and meaningful. This doesn't apply to all conversations, but when it's really deep and important, is to see if you can ask a question that the other person does not immediately know the answer to. Because if you watch someone do this, when I ask them a question, particularly a counselling scenario, and they do this. Well, I suppose it's this. Chances are that the thing that follows that looking around the room is pretty important. Because that means they're now trolling their subconscious for an answer that isn't close to the surface. Which means they may be about to find something they weren't expecting to find. Whereas if people only tell you things they can quickly rattle off the top of their head, then you're only getting information they already know about. So that's why these sorts of questions like, what's the worst thing about that, or what might be the worst thing that happened there, or things that they're like, oh, well, maybe it would be this. Yeah. As soon as you watch them do a little bit of digging, you realise you're probably really helping in terms of your listening. Because now they're getting to places that they haven't got before. So we want to ask open questions. Remember, an open question is one that requires you to speak. A closed question is one where only yes or no are the real genuine answers. The closed questions don't keep us moving forward very easily. The open questions keep exploring. So sometimes it could be as simple as, tell me more, or what are your thoughts about that? Or is there anything else that you'd like me to know about that? Like really broadly open. Just to keep people knowing that it's okay to keep going, to keep speaking. Right. Avoid abruptly changing the subject. We had that come up earlier, didn't we? Because that will appear that you weren't listening. And being open and neutral and withholding judgment. That's the real key. If we make it our goal when we're doing active listening, that it is one of the beautiful gifts of the human experience to have access to the inner world of another human being. That this is a precious gift. And by the way, when we're thinking about whether someone's story is boring, and some stories are really boring, I tell myself this. I bet you they wish they had a better story too. But this turns out to be their story. So I'm going to try and love it. Because I bet you even they wish they had a better work story. But it is their story. They can have no other. I genuinely wish to understand what it's like to live this human life through that other person's experience for a little while. And if you can learn to value that and see that the privilege of someone inviting you into that, then you will experience the deeper connection that's available between human beings when we do this. Because, sadly, many of us live lives that are very at the surface level, and we realise that we're only giving up a kind of a certain level of information that we'd be happy for anybody to know. But the deeper the relationship we wish for it to go, the more we must practice exploring the interior life together. Things that I don't tell everybody. Things that I might not tell another soul but you. As a counsellor, there is no more precious moment than when someone takes a deep breath and says, I've never told another person what I'm about to tell you. I lean forward and I go, well, this is going to be a gift. Because this is really important. Interior life is where we make connections. That's why active listening is so beautiful. And we're going to practice some of it with nothing too important because we're just practicing. So, I figure after however many years of lockdown we've been in now, it's years now, isn't it? That we're all in need of a holiday. That's what we talked about last time, that our bodies were drained by the lockdown experience. So, I'd like us to practice some active listening. So I want you to get into pairs, and you're both going to get a turn at this, so we'll spend a few minutes at it. And so when it's your turn to speak, you're going to describe your favourite holiday destination without mentioning a particular place. If instead of the 4 horsemen, we spent more time practicing our active listening, things would already start to be a lot better in relationships, wouldn't they? Because we would really be exploring and intending to understand the other person, what life is like through their eyes, what this problem is like through their eyes, and suddenly we're already far further along towards answers. This next section, I think, is the most important today. Certainly, for me, it has been the most important discovery in terms of relationship counselling. So much so that I've even had clients, when I've sort of sent them YouTube seminars to watch on this, have said, well, that's it, I don't need to come to you for counselling anymore. So I might be giving away the game here. But we're going to talk about something called non-violent communication. So this is another American Jewish psychologist who's no longer with us. He died a couple of years ago. His name is Marshall Rosenberg. And he established something called non-violent communication. He had noticed that war, at its worst, physical, battles, could be traced ultimately back to the way in which human beings talk to each other. That violence was a continuum. At one end was words and the other end were violent actions. And that if we could cut off the problems back at the words, we would never have to worry about the actions. Because actions are escalation of words. So he started to develop this idea about how we might talk to each other in what is called non-violent communication. If you visit my house, you'll notice that I periodically will have giraffes in my house. My wife bought, at one point, I don't know where they're gone now, 2 giraffes that were kissing. And when I went to South Africa last year, came home with a greenstone giraffe that's really beautiful. And that's because giraffe is one of the languages of non-violent communication, the one that we're supposed to be learning about. Sadly, many of us speak this other language, which Marshall Rosenberg has called jackal. He chose giraffe because the giraffe, it turns out, has the biggest heart in the animal kingdom to pump blood up that long neck of its. And so giraffe is the language of the heart, whereas jackal is the language of the head. And whilst our heads are okay, when it comes to navigating conflict, they often get in the way very quickly. So we're going to contrast and learn between giraffe and jackal. Not that they are particularly named, I think, in the video here. It generally just lays out this process of non-violent communication, then we're going to unpack it and even try and practice it together today before we go. So let's have a look at this video. All right. So we're going to hand out this handout as we finish today because we're going to use it in our time together. Micah, can I get you to that side, please? Darren, Jan, can I get you to that side? Okay, so we're going to use this as a tool. Some of you will have seen this handout if we've had conversations together. Yeah. So, as that's going around, we're going to unpack a little bit further the language of jackal. How do I know when I'm speaking jackal? Well, you'll know that jackal has appeared when you are using accusing language, justifying language, but perhaps this is the kind of the biggest clue when we start to use this dualistic right, wrong, good, bad kind of distinction. Because once we assess somebody else's actions as right or wrong or good or bad, we are talking about what we think about what they've done rather than how we feel about what they've done. And of course, once somebody hears that they're bad or they are wrong, what is going to be their posture? Defense. I'm under attack, I've been told I'm bad, I've been told I'm wrong, I need to keep myself safe now because I'm feeling under pressure. Now, it's not to say that there is no such thing as bad or no such thing as wrong, but rather it's incredibly unhelpful when we're trying to navigate the issue. We want to keep defense at bay. So guilt, shame, anger, these are the things that jackal uses. And this other problem at the bottom, which Rosenberg calls enemy images. He says the problem is that when we have feelings, we often connect them to enemy images. The problem here is that you're selfish. Or it could be the problem is me. I might turn myself into the enemy image. Well, if I was a better person, you'd want to spend time with me. So the reason that you don't spend time with me is just proof I'm faulty. I might be the enemy image. Or we might make the enemy image God or the circumstance. But certainly what we do is we connect the feeling to an enemy rather than to where it needs to get connected in order for us to have any chance of dealing with the issue. So giraffe is about connecting and understanding and focuses on feelings, not assessments, not judgments, not what I think, but what I feel. And so now we're in a much more mutual relationship because I'm interested in your needs and mine, and there's compassion and joy as I seek to help you meet your needs and work towards the advancement of my own needs. So giraffe is a much more loving and connecting way of talking because it's about what's really alive in me, which is my feelings. Right. We're going to find out together how jolly difficult it is to speak giraffe instead of jackal that comes naturally to many of us. So on the top of your handout, actually, can I have a copy of the handout? Where are the extras? Thank you. Oh. There we go. So I want to follow along. So you'll notice, thank you, that at the very top line of the handout is essentially the different phases, and we're going to work through the phases of communication in giraffe together. So the first is I want you to think about some kind of issue that you would like to address with somebody, preferably not the person sitting next to you. I'd much rather it be something not going to open up something here and now, but maybe something with somebody who isn't in the room. I want you to think about a situation and the particular action, the particular behaviour that is of concern to you, and probably on the back of the page, just to spend a minute writing down your description of that action, of that behaviour that you're finding to be some kind of problem to you. Okay, so we realised, gosh, right out of the gate, how hard is it to even name a problem without throwing in what I think about the problem for free? So we've got to become conscious now. Does the other person hear a criticism? Can they hear my analysis? Because they'll disagree with analysis. They'll say my analysis is wrong. Or they'll feel defensive about my analysis. So let's imagine that we did the first bit. Fine. Now we're going to see if we can't at least do the next bit. All right? So now we want to try and identify what is the feeling that is present in me, not the problem in you, but the feeling in me during this moment that I want to talk about. So what is the feeling in relation to what we are observing? We want to own the feeling. Nobody's making me feel any way. I feel it all by myself. Don't believe me? Just remember that time you were offended at the person who didn't say hello to you at church that morning. There were other people you were glad didn't say hello to you at church that morning. Not talking to you does not make you feel a certain way. You feel it all by yourself, depending on what you're telling yourself. So, I want you to now think about the same situation that you started to try and observe, and now look on the handouts, and since we're mostly talking about difficult situations, it'll be the middle columns of feelings that are most likely the ones that we're talking about. And I want you to start identifying no more than 3 feelings that are present about that situation. See, what we want to understand is that feelings and needs need to get paired up with each other. And words like disrespected and humiliated, betrayed, are connecting my feeling to the person instead of to the thing it belongs to, which is the need. See, feelings and needs go together. Now, it's obvious if I tell you a kind of a physical example about how feelings and needs belong together. If I feel hungry, what's the need? I need food. And if I eat, do I continue to feel hungry? Hopefully not. Maybe. That's the problem. Bad example. But essentially, the feeling of hunger is resolved by meeting the need. When the need is met, the hunger goes away. It resolves all by itself. I don't need to tell myself, don't be hungry anymore, Aaron. Right? It's just not there anymore. Okay? And so we could go the other way, and this will be a fascinating exercise, is the next time that you observe some happy feelings, is to ask yourself, what needs are being met that actually explain my happy feelings? So your happiness is not you waking up on the right side of the bed. It is the presence of fulfilled and met needs. Equal happy feelings. They're on the other side of this. So this is why we must connect our feelings to our needs instead of to other people. So when we use language and assessment, we're making it about others, and we're getting further away from the feeling being resolved. See, if I say, you're disrespecting me, and the other person says, no, I'm not, do I feel more or less disrespected? I just increased the disrespect feeling. So I've gotten further away from the answer. That feeling is now growing louder. Why? Because it still wants me to acknowledge that there's a need that is needing some attention, and this conversation isn't providing that. This little argument about who's disrespecting who. So my feelings, they are my reaction to life. And it's interesting how you were surprised when I pointed out that you could have been amused. But when you think about it, it's actually a legitimate option, right? People thought I was sleeping in and even having on about it. That's hilarious. You idiots. You know? Jack. You could have found that funny. You could have found it quizzical. You know, nothing in particular, like, oh, how fascinating that that's what you think. You're wired up so differently to me. When I see people's cars are in their driveway, I think that's none of my business. You know, you could have had lots of reactions to... Right. But you understand that there were a variety of responses. And it turns out that you felt embarrassed when it was suggested that maybe you had been lazy. Because you heard the jackal of that. You heard the assessment that you are wrong. Right. You're a recovering lazy person. Well, welcome to the group. So, what we want to do is stop connecting our feelings to other people who really, in the end, we're just going to escalate if we keep making it their problem. That the problem here is you disrespecting me, you humiliating me, you accusing me, you. Right? They can't help me. What's needed is for me to make a stronger connection between the need that is screaming for some attention. So the needs, or some people prefer the word values because they don't like the idea of being needy, but heck, welcome to the human race. You know, we have needs. I have a need for food every day. I have a need for rest every day. I mean, it's just part of being human. But anyway, maybe you can use the word value if you like it better. Judgments of others are alienated expressions of our own unmet needs. Because we're hoping other people will guess in the midst of the assessment what I'm needing, and that they will somehow magically start serving that need. But if they do, and get this, friends, if they do, it will be for the wrong reason. It will be because of the threat of punishment. It will be because you are threatening them with the punishment of your happiness or lack thereof. If people only meet your needs because they fear you being disappointed with them, angry with them, upset with them, or worse, you'll actually do hurtful things towards them. But mostly in life, isn't it just that we hate for people to be unhappy with us? That's enough for most of us. Well, that's entirely the wrong reason to be meeting needs. That's the problem with Jackal, is it sets up a world where I'm motivated by avoiding punishment. It turns out to be a really lousy reason to do things. If we express our needs, we have a better chance of getting them met. We are bringing up into the conversation the thing that's relevant. It's not relevant that you disrespected me, but it is relevant that I have a real need to feel safe in the relationship. And when you said I was an idiot, I felt really scared because I have a need for safety. Right? So now we want to connect that feeling to a legitimate need. And there has to be some rational connection between it. So we want to start thinking about what are the needs. So we noticed before, Jasmine said that she was feeling this unprotected. Actually, she was, at that point, her mind was a little muddled between the need and the feeling, right? But we can hear now there's a need there, something around security, something around safety. Something about predictability, maybe, that your actions are predictable. I can anticipate that you will act in a certain way. So I want you to now spend a moment making a link. You've signaled 2 or 3 feelings there. Let's see if you can't connect them to a couple of relevant needs that might be wanting a bit of attention. Right, and then the final phase is about making clear requests. Oh, my bad. Just 3 phrases. Fine. So now we've got the problem, free of assessment, just some action that we can all agree is kind of a reasonable description of what we found. Then the fact that I have certain feelings, and I need to make sure that those are really feelings, that they're not things that can be argued about. That's the great test. If you can argue about it, it isn't a feeling. Can't say to you, you're not sad. See, assessment invites argument, but what does a genuine feeling invite? Compassion, empathy. Oh, you're sad. Oh, that's not nice. I don't like the sound of that. But when I hear that it's me who's bad, I'm so busy trying to make myself feel okay, I didn't notice how sad you were. Right, so I've got my feelings sorted. I'm realizing, hey, my feelings are going to get sidetracked if they get diverted off into enemy images, into others, into me being bad, them bad, life is bad, God is bad. Somebody's bad, somebody's to blame here. No. I have a feeling, and it's trying to tell me something. It's trying to alert me that some of my needs have moved from the met into the unmet status. And remember, this is dynamic. If an armed gunman walked into this room right now, fired into the roof and said, everybody down on the ground, which need on that list would suddenly go to all of ours number 1? Safety, right? It would suddenly instantly be, oh, all bets are off. There's a new need, is the number 1 need. Well, I need to be safe. Right? So needs are constantly changing. They can change very, very quickly. They're dynamic. Because we're alive. Right? So, We've worked out, though, this feeling is connected to this need. And now I've got to work out, what can I do about it? What Rosenberg simply calls need-serving action. What need-serving action gets me an increased chance of others helping me with that need, but because I've recognised that it's my feeling and my need, my starting point is not other people, it's me. What could I do with this need? Is there something I could do? Could I just reassure myself that actually I have grown and changed and I don't need to worry about if other people can see it or not, because that's not what's important. What's important is that I know I'm not that guy anymore. You could meet that need almost exclusively by yourself and be okay with that situation, and then maybe not even bring it up with them. Because you noticed the feeling of embarrassment was connected to the need to be seen, and you saw yourself, you reassured yourself, and realised it doesn't feel that bad anymore. Whatever. No, it might have been that you thought, no, I still need to talk this one through, because, there's this kind of scared that they are seeing me a certain way, and I wonder what that might mean, so what you want to talk about. So then we need to make a request, either of ourselves or of somebody else. And here's what we're thinking. You see, this is, I love Giraffe so much, because now I'm inviting others to make my life more wonderful, to help me meet needs in me. And I'm asking, and this is the great challenge of this section, is that it might end up being a demand, a politely worded demand. And the difference will be, here we go, is no an acceptable answer. Because if no is not an acceptable answer from the other person, you have just made a polite demand. Because a genuine request means that they must know that it's okay to say, no, I can't help you with that. No, I'm not available for that. And no, there's no risk of you punishing them for the no. So this is the tough bit of Giraffe, is that we struggle with this but we realise, when I first encountered this, I remember turning to my wife and I think I uttered a phrase something like this: I think I'm 40 years old at the time, and I don't think I've ever made a genuine request in my life. I realised that the implied punishment of failure to comply with my request was present all the time. And that no was really not an acceptable answer. And I found ugliness in that, I realised, gosh, I'm hopeful that there really were some exceptions, but I just really couldn't think of any. I thought, my goodness, I think I really speak Jackal really well. I might be flawed. So this is a challenge for us. Can we take the heat out of it by saying, and why must no be an acceptable answer? Right, otherwise the other person is feeling forced, obligated. Right, it's really just a statement but with a nice question mark on the end. Right, it is an aspect of some disrespect there.
My son is really good at this. I will say, would you please empty the recycling bin? And he immediately asks back, is that a request or demand?
Yeah, it's a good question, isn't it? Yeah. It's a great question. So, deciding that relationships suffer if we live with demands, when we must live with requests. But what's still the most fundamental reason why no must be an acceptable answer? And tell me what the boundary. What boundary?
The ability to not agree.
Right, so there's a respect of the other person's boundary. Sure. And most fundamental, even beyond that. Whose need is it? Mine. So no has to be an acceptable answer, because we're not talking about you. We're talking about me and my needs. See, this is why Giraffe works, because suddenly you realise, oh, I'm talking about me. And so often what has gotten muddled up is that it sounds like I'm talking about you. That you'd be better and you'd be right and you'd be good if you would do this. But actually, it's me who has the need. So ultimately, you have to be able to say no, because this is about me. It's my needs, it's my feelings. So I need to take responsibility for the moment that's occurring. Now, I can invite others, and isn't it lovely when others, and think on the other side of this, on the other side of a demand is a request. And when I genuinely invite another human being into my world to help me with a need of mine, and they know that they're allowed to say no, but they choose to say yes, what a difference that makes. What a precious gift it is now. Oh, you're here because you want to be here. You've said yes because you want to say yes. And now, you're meeting my need feels like the gift it needs to be. Because it's freely chosen. It hasn't been extracted from you, it hasn't been manipulated from you. You have freely offered it. And then it actually hits the mark in me. Because if you meet my need voluntarily, what do I now know about you? You care about me. You love me. But if you comply just because you fear punishment, what do I know about you? That you're scared of me. Ouch. The wrong reason to act. Yeah.
Can I ask how does this specifically work with a parent-child dynamic? Because the whole thing of when the parents,
Sure.
how does that work?
Yeah. And it might well be that particularly while children are small, this is much harder to navigate. And perhaps we're mostly talking about adult interactions. But nonetheless, I think if a child became aware, they could say, well, Mum, I'd much rather do this in a way that met your need rather than because I'm afraid of you. I mean, imagine Mum stopping in her tracks. Let me tell you the story. This is the sadness of coming to this as late as I did. My son couldn't wait to leave home. It was a blended family situation. When he got to about 16, he bolted for his dad's house. And one of the many, many things was this, the failure to do this. And I'll give you the particular example that rings in my head, because as soon as I learned it, I realised how frustrated I was I didn't know it. I used to be on Jack's case about taking out the rubbish. Oh my God. If I'd said it once, would he take out the rubbish? Don't take out the rubbish. And in the end, I was just exasperated, and of course, I just went further and further into Jackal, threatening all kinds of blue murder for failing it to take out the rubbish. And then, eventually, I heard something that I wished I'd stopped to ask. He said, I can't bear to be around the rubbish. Whenever I see flies, worms, maggots, filth, I feel really, really yucky. He was meeting his need every time he said no to me. And I never once stopped to ask, what need is he meeting by disobeying me? Gosh, I wish I understood this. Everybody who's ever resisted you has been meeting a need when they did it. Everybody. Because as Rosenberg, I think, rightly says, every action is need-serving. It's just sometimes it's a tragic way to meet a need. If I had understood that Jack had a need for safety, he didn't feel safe, for order, he didn't like the fact that it was messy and unpredictable, didn't know what he'd find, I'd understood he had this need, I could have offered to meet it. I could have said, mate, how about I do the rubbish and you do the dishes? And we could have navigated it. We could have found something that met his needs. But to realise only once he left home that his disobedience and the resulting punishments, both verbal and relational, were all because they'd never stopped to ask, what need is he meeting by saying no to me? And he was meeting a need the whole time. So this is what happens, when we speak Jackal, we end up hurting people we care about because we don't find out what their need is. So, final section. I want you to write a request. See if you can't write a request to yourself. So it might say, I have a feeling, I'm feeling this, and I have a need, so I give myself permission to. You might give yourself a request, or you might say, so I would ask that you. Now, here, listen, before we write it, I need to tell you about requests. Like at the beginning, they need to be actions free of analysis. So, for example, you can't have a request of, I need you to care more. Because I have to decide whether you care, all right? I can't ask you to care because I'm the guardian of whether I believe or not you care, all right? But I can ask for a specific behaviour. I'm feeling, when I notice that you're working late every night, I'm feeling lonely and disconnected because I have a real need for connection and intimacy. So I'd love to ask, would it be okay if we had coffee together on Saturday morning? Right? That's how it should sound. So that the action is just a plain action, but it's clear that that action bears some relationship to the need. Having coffee is definitely going to help me feel connected and increase the chances of me experiencing that need for intimacy. Right? So, now that you've got a clear idea of requests, how to go them. So as we finish today, we've had these three big pieces today. We've had the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. We've had realizing that actually if I spend more time listening and less time talking, we might kind of cut some things off at the past. And when it is time to talk, there's this new language that might help me stay connected to what I'm feeling and I need rather than assessment. So what have you picked up today that's going to be useful for you? We're going to take away and go, that is something I want to think more about, practice more, learn more about. All right, folks, well, that's us for another day. Well done. That's 2 of 4. So next time, it's been asked, is the next one only for people in couple relationships and romantic relationships? And look, to be absolutely fair, the answer is mostly. But the reality is we are all in important relationships. So whether that's with other family members or with friends, most of us desire to grow closer to others. So the things that we'll talk about next time, yes, I confess, will mostly be framed in marriage relationship terms, and so I'll apologise in advance, but they're highly transferable. You'll be able to pick up those and go, this is also how you become a great friend, a great family member, how you enrich connections with others. So Joe, I'll hand it back to you, but I appreciate your engagement this morning. You've been a great group. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your weekend.
Thank you so much, Aaron. Nothing much more from me, only that there is a list just on the table by the door that if you would like an email as a reminder about the next session coming up in about a month's time, pop your email down. We're happy to send you a reminder, send you a little advert, something for your fridge, something to give you to your mates. Also in the little packs, if you didn't grab one, there's a few more out there, is our email here at the Red Hill Community Centre. If you would like the PowerPoints, if you would like the handouts because you put yours down somewhere and can't remember where it is, we can also email you those. Erin is happy to share them, and we'll send you a link to the video as well so that you can go back and remind yourself about all the things you learned today. Thank you so much for coming. It's lovely to have you here. Thanks again, Erin. Lots of helpful insights, and have a wonderful rest of your weekend.